I used to believe that silence meant safety. I thought if I kept my head down, if I kept my mouth shut, and my past buried, the world would pass me by and leave me alone. I thought I could become invisible. I learned the shape of quiet, the way other people learn to fold laundry precise. Kafelv. Deliberate. I taught my daughter the same small rituals, peanut butter sandwiches with the crusts cut off. A crooked braid in the morning. A bedtime story read in the same soft voice. Habits make a life look like a life. Habits make guilt look like normalcy. That morning, everything felt normal enough. Lila was humming to herself at the kitchen table. Crayons scattered like cheap promises across a pad of paper. She was 7. With knees that always looked like they'd been skinned at some point. And a concentration that made her seem older than she was. I was making her lunch peanut butter. Cut, just how she liked it. And pretending the shadows outside the window were only shadows. Not footsteps. "Mummy. Look," she said. Her voice was small and sleepy and private. Like the end of a dream. She held up the page like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Proud as a child with a new drawing, it was a snake. Coiled tight. Thongasplit. Wrapped around a dagger. Thick black lines. Clumsy scales. A hilt. Sketched with the kind of certainty a child has when she wants an answer to something she doesn't yet understand. My throat closed when I saw it. The paper blurred for a second. The world narrowed to that inked coil. I knew that pattern, the way someone knows a familiar scar. I had seen it before, in a room that smelled of cigarettes and dark perfume. Under harsh lights, and men who smiled like threats. The dagger. The snake. The way the tale finished in a curl that looked like an unfinished sentence. "Where did you see that, baby?" I asked. And even my voice didn't sound like my own. She took a breath, like she was about to tell a secret. "Yesterday. The nice man at the store had it on his arm. He bought me a candy. He said I drew pretty." The world rearranged itself into a question I didn't want to answer. The store across from her school. The one I always told her to cross with an adult. The one I said nothing about, because silence felt safer than the truth. I dropped the knife I'd been holding to cut bread and crouched down until my eyes were level with hers. Her small hands were warm between my palms. Her knuckles still soft from the habit of holding crayons. "What did you tell him? Did he ask your name?" I tried to make my voice steady. I failed. She shrugged like it was nothing. "No. He already knew me. He said, 'You must be Lila's girl.'" She smiled at the memory. Proud of a compliment she'd been given. I did not know how to be proud of that. I felt hollowed out from the inside. As if some small piece of the life I'd built had been carved away. While I blinked. I said nothing. I could not. I felt the pulse at my throat beating that old, predictable rhythm fear. Then the frantic edge of survival. That beat has a way of picking up speed until it's all the body can hear. By noon, I had packed a bag. Packing is a strange kind of prayer. In it you admit that normal is an illusion, and that running has to be an option. I pulled Lila out of school with a lie about a doctor's appointment, and we drove and drove until the city skyline thinned into telephone poles, and the radio was just a warm blur. Lila thought we were on a trip. She sang along to a song and held my hand in the way kids do, when they trust without reservation. I tried, desperately, to match that trust with a face that didn't show the way my hands trembled. And I thought the past had been written small, until it walked through the door of a diner, like it had the right to be there. We stopped in the kind of roadside place that smells like coffee and fried things and faded conversations. I ordered pancakes for Lila, because she loved them. Because small comforts feel like armor sometimes. I told myself I was only giving her a meal. But the truth is, letting someone else cook for you is a kind of surrender. A small admission that you are still human. Then the bell above the door jingled. The sound was ordinary. The world should not have tilted on a sound like that. He came in with a slow confidence, that made the air seem to move differently, like it knew him, and had already decided how it would behave. He had a black shirt, sleeves rolled up the way men who keep their hands busy do. The collar of his shirt sat open in a way that revealed the top of his forearm. And there it was, the snake coiled around the dagger in permanent black. The same crooked artistry that had been traced in my memory for years. His eyes found me before he spoke. They were grey, storm grey. The kind that looks like rain is waiting to begin. There was nothing theatrical in his movement. He walked like a man who had always owned the ground he stood on. You've been hard to find, Eva, he said. He said my name like it was a thing that had weight. Like my name itself could be a weapon or a confession. He said it softly. The way you say something delicate and dangerous at the same time. Time folded. I could not tell if the bell's jingle was still somewhere behind us, or if that sound had been swallowed by the moment his voice hit my skin. My daughter did not look up. She was busy with a crayon, her attention unbothered by men and histories. That made my chest hurt in a complicated way. Because part of me wanted Lila to look, to see what I had seen in the dark rooms of my past. And another part of me wanted to shield her from any knowledge that would make her stop believing the world is soft. He didn't step forward. He just stood there, calm as a thing that's been waiting a long time. You thought silence would keep you safe, he said, not unkindly, but the past has a way of breathing. I wanted to tell him to leave. I wanted to tell myself to breathe. I wanted to rip the world open and pick out the lie that said I could ever be entirely free. But my voice was thin and small. You don't get to be here. You don't get to. My protest died halfway. Words are useless against the shape of someone who has already decided the answer to everything. He looked past me, at my daughter, then back at me. There was a softness sudden and terrible in his face, like the brief flash of a person before a storm takes them. She's beautiful, he said. She looks like you did when you first walked into my brother's office. My voice broke when I said the name that carried a weight I'd sworn off. Don't say his name. It came out ragged. A line I had not meant to cross. He bent closer. Breath a warm nothing against my ear. You think you can hide what's written in blood, Eva. You think the past stays buried because you moved cities. I want to know if you told her about me. If you told her where we come from. There are many kinds of lies. I had told myself 100 of them, small, glittering ones that made the nights easier to sleep through. I had told Lila a life that was simple enough for 7 years. I had told myself that love could be burned away like ash and lost forever. None of that mattered now. He smiled then. But it was not cruel. It was the kind of smile a man gives when he is trying to make peace with something he has done, and the things he cannot take back. Pack your things, he said. You're coming with me. Sometimes fear is the easiest decision. Sometimes leaving is the only honest one. I felt the room tilt. The pancake plate blurred. The diner, the radio. The waitresses. The little girl, with crayons, contracted into a single point, where everything imploded. I took Lila's hand, and it felt like holding the last small thing I had of a life I had tried to make ordinary, outside. The parking lot smelled like spilled gasoline and late sun. He stood beside a black car, with the driver's door open like a promise. For a second I wanted to run toward that open space, and never look back. For a second I wanted to stay and fight with every one of the old words I had learnt in darker rooms. I did not know what was worse, walking back into his life, or understanding that maybe, just maybe, he was the reason I had survived. A faint click came from across the lot near the gas pumps. A shadow moved. He saw it too. And then the night narrowed to a sound, a gunshot that shattered glass, and the small, steady world I tried to build. Get in the car. Eva, he said. He said it like the world had already chosen. My heart tried to tear out of my chest and run. I could taste metal. I could smell smoke, and the quiet that comes after panic. Lila screamed once. That small, piercing child scream that rearranges everything inside you. And my arms were moving of their own accord as we dove behind the car. As metal and noise and shouts filled the air, I realized that silence had been a lie I told myself to survive. It had kept me breathing, but it had not kept me safe. The past had come for me on the arm of a man I had once loved and almost lost. The moment his voice said, my name. My life stopped being only mine. You've been hard to find, Eva, he had said, and somewhere under the noise, under the gunfire, and the sound of a child crying, I understood that the choice was no longer mine alone. He pushed the car into motion, with the steady, effortless patience of someone who had driven this road 1,000 times in his head. I sat in the front seat with Lila in my lap, because somewhere between the shot and the smoke, I had stopped trusting my legs. Nikolai's hands were quiet on the wheel. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. The space between us was full of things we'd said, full of things we hadn't, full of the small betrayals that make ordinary lives unravel. Back in the diner, the silver coffee pot was still steaming. Half a plate of pancakes gone cold. The waitress had gone to the back with shaking hands. People whispered. Someone called the police. I wanted to rat him out. I wanted to shout his name and tell the police everything I had hidden for years. Instead, I wrapped my arms around Lila and listened to the car's tires swallow the road. He finally spoke with the same slow certainty he'd used when he said my name. You don't have to go anywhere with me, Eva. But I will say this, if you stay, if you come with me, you might live. There was no theatrics to his tone. Just a fact. Delivered like a doctor, explaining the prognosis. Choice felt like an illusion in the heat of that moment. But it was still a choice. For the sake of my daughter, I chose him. I chose an odd kind of safety. The kind that comes with the knowledge that a dangerous man has put you in his mouth and decided not to swallow. We drove until the city gave up its edges and the telephone poles became markers of distance rather than memory. He took us to a lake house that smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. He told me it belonged to a man who owed him a favor. He said it like he expected me not to question the favor. And maybe that was the point. There are times when you accept help without asking who paid the bill. Inside the house, the world was uncomfortably beautiful. Big glass windows looked out over water that sat like a separate universe, cool, steady, indifferent. Leela ran to the window and pressed her face against the glass, drawing a circle with a finger like it was an invitation. For a moment my chest felt like it could hold both hope and terror without cracking. He watched her with a strange softness. The same softness that had made me think, once, that monsters could be different up close. He introduced himself gently, like a man reintroducing himself to someone he once loved and hurt. Hey, sweetheart. You like drawing, he said. Lila nodded. Shy. There's a big window in here. Draw that if you want. She did. Of course. Children draw what they feel. They are poor historians and excellent seers. At night, he kept watch by the window. The ember of a cigarette, making a small red planet in the dark. The sound of his breathing was the sound of a life I knew and wanted to unknow. I sat across the room, pretending to fix Lila's hair, while my thoughts did the slow, dangerous thing of unspooling. I wanted him gone. I wanted him dead. I wanted everything reconciled by simple answers. Instead, I had a man sitting in my living room who used to be my entire world, and now looked like a stranger, with my name on his tongue. Why now, I asked later. When the house had folded into shadow, and the lake was a silver band beyond the glass. Why come back at all? He looked at me as if he had rehearsed the answer and decided against theatrics. Because someone came for you, he said. Not one of mine. People who want leverage, tend to be freelance, smarter, meaner, with less to lose. They think you have something that belongs to them. What could I possibly have that anyone would want? The question sounded pathetic, even in my head. It was the sound of a woman trying to convince herself she had nothing valuable left. He blew a line of smoke and took a long breath like he was choosing the truth out of a cluttered drawer. Your father hid things. Files. Papers. Dirt that belongs to people who kill for secrets. They think you know where it is. The world rearranged itself around those two small sentences. My father, the man I had mourned, the man whose memory had been the scaffold of my hatred, had been more complicated than I'd allowed. I had built an entire mythology around the idea that my father had been innocent and that the Moretti family had been the monster. It's easier to hold on to a clean enemy than a messy truth. You're lying, I said before I could stop myself. Denial is reflexive. He wouldn't. The words lodged like stones. Nikolai's jaw worked. You didn't know. Your father was not a saint. He worked with my family until he turned on us. He paid with his life for a betrayal none of you deserved. But he didn't die because we wanted to punish an innocent man. He died because he made a choice that put you in danger. How do I know you're not the monster in that story? I asked. Because sometimes you need to say the thing you fear most aloud to see if the words have any weight. He didn't look offended. He looked oddly tired. Because I didn't kill him. I've spent years with that weight. I don't want to trade your life for my absolution. There was a pause, heavy enough to feel like thunder. I protected you. Once. I carried guilt like an old coat and tried to wear it as penance. I couldn't fix it then. But I can keep you safe now. Something inside me, an old hurt, that had been leaning toward hatred for so long it had a voice. Cracked. I wanted to hate him with the kind of purity anger makes possible. But hatred requires certainty. The truth he offered was an uneven thing harder to fight than the versions I had told myself for years. After the confession, the house fell into a brittle quiet. Lila slept in the guest room, and I sat in the living room with a mug of coffee gone cold. The air tasted like smoke. I tried to imagine my life as a series of neat boxes. This did not fit into any. It felt like a puzzle, with a missing center. Only a few days past time had a way of moving strange when you were running, but the attacks didn't stop. The same ring at the door, late at night. The same shadows along the tree line. One night, someone we had thought dead walked back into our life with a gun and a grudge. The firefight was quick and terrible. I remember the sound sharp, animal, as real as bone, and the smell cordite, and something metallic. Nikolai moved like he belonged to the world of violence, in a way that made me want to vomit and cry at the same time. He was all precision and quiet fury. A man who knew where to place a hand, where to stand, how to keep a body between the person he loved and the blade of danger. He took a bullet for us. It caught the flat of his shoulder and cut him down like a thing that had been caught and surprised. For a moment, everything slowed, like a breath held after someone has said something you never expected to hear. He was on the floor bleeding and calm. And the world felt simultaneously too loud and too small. I hit him first, reflex. Not thought. And then I hit the ground beside him. Because the thing you do when someone you've loved falls apart is try to gather the pieces. Lila was somewhere behind me. A small sound that might have been a sob or a gasp. My hands shook, as if they had a life of their own. He looked at me then. Eyes hazy with pain, but sharp enough for the truth to live in the space between us. You still think you can run from me, he asked. Every syllable, a struggle. I don't know anymore, I whispered. And the words tasted like surrender and admission, and a strangely clean kind of relief. I had been pretending to run not because I could escape my past, but because I thought moving would be the same as changing. It wasn't. Running had never solved anything. It had only made places to hide. He smiled, then not a full smile, but something like a memory that tried to be kind. Then maybe stop running with your eyes closed, he said. See what's there. See what's true. I wanted to hate him in that moment. I wanted to be the woman who could point at him and say, definitively, you are the one who took everything. But the truth had been a small, precise blade that cut through those easy lines. I saw, suddenly, and painfully, that his life had been braided with mine in ways I had always refused to admit. He had been both my danger and my shelter. The house smelled like blood and rain, the night they left us there. Broken and quiet. He pressed a hand to his wound and tried to stand. Lila curled into my side, like she had done every night of her life. As if safety could be held in a small human shape. I wanted to crawl inside the two of them and never come out. When the attackers were gone, the silence that settled was different. Not the soft silence I'd built my life on, but a deep, honest quiet. It felt like the world pausing before the next long breath. I sat and watched him as he slept. His face was slack with pain, with release, with things I couldn't read. I watched the rise and fall of a chest that had once been the center of my ruin, and now, absurdly, my refuge. You can forgive a wound only by learning what cut you. The truth had come like a tide and pulled away the sand where I had been comfortable pretending innocence. It left raw edges. It left me with a decision I would have to make: continue running into the small pleasures of a life made of lies, or face the dangerous, complicated truth that the past was a shape I would carry and could, perhaps, reshape. When morning came, the lake was still, and the world pretended it had not been on fire the night before. I traced the outline of a small handprint left on a glass and thought about what it meant to let someone be both your danger and your protector. The lines blurred, like ink in water, and that blur, messy and alive, was where we were forced to live. Night comes like a bruise, slow and deep, and when it fell over the lake that night, it took the last thin thread of safety with it. We had thought we were safe enough to sleep me, curled like a small secret on the futon. Lila, with a blanket twisted around her knees, and Nikolai in the chair by the window, with his jacket pulled tight. The house breathed around us, a living thing that had been given to strangers and asked to hold their fear. The knock at the door was polite in a way that made me laugh, then cry too polite for people who were about to burn a life down. I had learned to recognize a polite knock as a prelude to violence. It was the kind of courtesy murderers give you before they take your breath. When the door opened, light and shadow moved together, and something cold stepped into the room. He found me before I could move, like he always did. The first man was a silhouette, and the second was a voice. The gunshots arrived with that same animal sound that has never stopped meaning the same thing. To me, the world has decided. Nikolai moved like he had been cut from a different cloth built for this universe. He was not graceful. He was efficient. He was a thing you did not want to be on the other end of. They were not Moretti men. He had been right about that. They were freelance ghosts with names nobody wanted to remember. They wanted leverage, and they had decided that leverage might be me. Maybe it was the last thing my father had left, or the last thing he thought would keep us safe. I do not know. I only know the way sound makes a shape, when you are in the middle of it. Nikolai fought like the man I had once loved, had learned how to survive, and then learned how to be brutal, in a way that kept people alive. He moved to place himself between the shooters and the small shapes I loved. He took a bullet for me, more than one. And this one did not look like it had any intention of being kind. He fell, and the house filled with the terrible, intimate noise of something breaking. I dragged Lila behind me like I could be a wall if I wrapped myself tight enough around her. He bled in a way that felt slow, like a clock being wound down. He found me with eyes that still had that dangerous, odd softness in them, like a man who had once held me in darkness and tried to remember whether he was a monster or a man. Get them. The leader shouted at his men. Make sure there's no trace left. Nikolai's hands were on the floor, and then on a gun, and then on the world again. He fought like someone who had been given a final instruction: bury the past, properly this time. He shoved me and Lila toward the back door, and then he was somewhere else. A body steering a truth we had not wanted to face. The explosion came like a decision. It peeled the house apart and threw smoke into the night like a warning to stars. Fire took the glass and made the lake into a mirror of something that had been burned and remade 1,000 times. I did not see the end, only the sound, and then the absence of it. By the time the people who had come for us ran away or were gone, by the time the night stopped roaring, we were two in a shadow. They told me later, people who report things as if life can be translated into facts, that the house burned for hours. They called it an accident in some versions, and a tragedy in others. I called it something else. I could not say aloud without choking. I called it the place where a man decided to pay for what he believed he had cost me. I woke up on the side of the road with Lila's head in my lap, and the smell of smoke still stitched to my clothes. My fingers were sticky with something that could have been ash or could have been the last soft part of a hand I had once wanted to hold forever. They said they had found footprints leading away from the wreckage. They said they had found only ashes and a piece of metal that could maybe be a shirt clasp. They said they had no body. I said nothing that was useful and learned how to keep my mouth shut again. But this time, the silence tasted different, like a wound. You know will scar. But you also know you will carry the scar to prove you lived. Months passed like a slow, patient wave. We moved cities because the body remembers places even when you think you have erased them. I took a job at a small bookstore that smelled like paper and safe things. Lila made friends with dust and bookmarks. We learned the quiet of other people's lives again. The nights did not feel clean, but they felt possible. Then one morning, the world shifted on a page, slipped under the bookstore door. There was no envelope, no flourish, just a note and a drawing folded in a way that made me feel the same small pulse I had felt the day I first saw that tattoo in crayon. For her protection. Always. N. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Lila's new drawing was taped to the note: the lake. A house with smoke curling up like a sad banner. And two small figures standing beside each other. One of them had a thick black line on an arm that looked uncannily like the tattoo she'd drawn months ago. I stared at the paper until the ink blurred. The handwriting on the note was sharp and careful, the kind that belonged to someone who had measured every word he'd ever said. There was a flash drive tucked into the fold with nothing on it but a grainy clip that showed a man collapsing outside a hospital. Half-burned and stubborn, I watched him breathe in that footage until I believed in his breath again. And then another day, because fate is not gentle, and sometimes it is the kindest thing that ever happens. A shadow stood under the bookstore light. He had the same way of being that made the air feel as if it had been waiting for him to arrive. He was older. He had a scar cutting his eyebrow that looked like a small private map. He had the tattoo on his forearm like an echo, and he walked like someone who had carried weight long enough to make his steps deliberate. You were supposed to be gone, I said, and my voice came out like gravel. He smiled. And it was small and not at all triumphant. I was for a while. He said, I was a ghost. Things happened. I walked away so the hunt would stop. They wanted leverage, and I was tired of their methods. How, I asked? Because there is always a how that makes a miracle into a fact you can live with. He looked at Lila with the kind of softness that had nothing to do with the man who had once been my enemy, and everything to do with the man who had once been my shelter. Because she remembered me before she met me. He said, and his voice was the kind that believes in both fate and second chances. That meant something. Someone had to decide how the story ended. You burned your world for us, I said, because I needed to know whether what I had believed his death, his ruin, had been a sacrifice or a trick, I needed to name the thing that had left me with a new kind of life. He looked tired in a way that made forgiveness easier. Or harder? I could never tell which. I decided it was the only way to be sure you could live. He said, I couldn't make fate kind. I could make it final. I walked away this time, so the hunt would think it was done. That doesn't mean I'm not here when you need me. He said, the last part, like a promise that might be kept from a distance. The idea that he had burned a life, possibly his own for our safety, was something that did not fit neatly into hatred or gratitude. It was the kind of complicated currency that love sometimes trades in, when it has no other way to pay. Lila took to him as a child takes to air. She's always breathed. She showed him the drawings in a way that made me ache. She was unafraid because she had known him first in color and line. Not in fear. He knelt and kissed the top of her head like it was a thing he had been waiting his life to touch again. We ate a quiet dinner that night, simple. Like the kind of meals we had after the lake house. He didn't stay long. Men like him do not belong in ordinary places for long. Before he left, he took my hand, like it was something to be treasured and not taken for granted. You don't have to forgive me, he said. I don't expect that, but know that when I left the danger behind. Then why come back, I asked. Because I needed to hear a reason that was not just another weapon. He looked out the window, where the city lights hummed like distant stars. Because sometimes memory remembers what our mouths forget, he said. Because she remembered me before she learned my sins. Because fate is a rope we sometimes trip over into each other's arms. There are endings that are neat and satisfying, and others that are jagged and true. This was the latter. We did not ride off into anything clean. We filed police reports and changed numbers, and lived in a house that had no glass to shatter. We learned how to build lives out of smaller promises, that we would keep Lila safe, that we would tell her the truth when she was ready, that we would let the past be past without pretending it had not shaped us. When I tell this story now, I tell it like a small confession. There are things I still cannot say out loud without my voice cracking. There are nights I still hear the echo of a bell and feel the weight of someone in a doorway. But when I look at my daughter's drawings and see that same coil of ink around a dagger, the terror is soft now, like a lesson, rather than a wound. Love doesn't fix monsters. It doesn't wash away the sins carved into a life. But sometimes, love reminds monsters that they were human once. Sometimes it teaches them how to keep a candle lit instead of a match. Maybe that's enough. If this story found you, subscribe, share, and let someone else feel what survival sounds like. Love doesn't fix monsters. It doesn't erase what we've done. But sometimes, it reminds us that even broken hearts can still protect, still forgive, still love again. And maybe that's enough. If this story found you in the quiet hours, if it made your chest ache a little, if it reminded you that healing isn't always gentle, don't just leave. Stay. Hit the like button. It tells me you felt something. Subscribe, so you don't miss the next story that hits where words usually can't. Share this video with someone who believes love can't survive darkness, because maybe it can. And tell me in the comments, what did this story make you remember? Then a soft pause fade with ambient music. Faint echo of Eva's last whisper. Sometimes survival isn't silence. It's the courage to keep speaking, even when your voice shakes.